watch the replay.
Oh.
Yeah, they're,
I
guess if you do, you're interested.
Yeah,
right?
because you're watching it when you
And that's why you get done these stupid things in a piece of where you get a lot of numbers. Well, yeah, but somebody actually watches the replays, I think you're interested.
Yeah.
It's good.
I like that little stand. That's adorable.
Yeah, this is a great little thing that I got when the kids were really small.
Yeah.
This wraps on anything.
Oh, it's just
And then
adorable.
Do this again. This one goes to the river as well. And that goes to. For now, it's fine. Don't switch. No, actually, it's.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Fawn Annan, president of ITWC, and I also welcome my co-host, Jim Love, CIO and Chief Content Officer of IT World Canada, and we are your hosts for today's webinar, Moving from Leads to Lead Completion. We have great content for you today, but before we get started, let's take care of a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to submit your questions through the Ask a Question box. We will make every effort to finish on time. Please stick around for the hour to get the full benefit of the program. Watch for a thank you email from ITWC, which will contain the download link to this presentation. You should receive your email by the end of the week. At the end of the webinar, please take a moment to complete the evaluation form, as we really need your feedback to design better quality programs. Now, on to the program. This is the first in a series of webinars which will explore topics related to successful online marketing. They will feature myself and Jim and other special guests. We welcome your suggestions for other webinar topics, and please send them to cmo@itwc.ca. So what is the thing that generates most business sales success? Leads. You know you have a great product or service, you know you've hired talented staff, and you've spent time perfecting your customer experience. But none of those matter if you haven't got any leads. Lead generation is critical. Successful companies spend a lot of time and money trying to get leads. Is your lead program effective? Content, events, sponsorships, email, online advertising, and social media all present opportunities. But given the current complexity in the marketplace, many companies still struggle to turn the leads into meaningful meetings with purchasers or influencers. In this webinar, we'll be exploring the following areas of concern that are often highlighted by clients when they first come for us for help. The changing face of lead generation, why the old techniques aren't working, the strengths and weaknesses of different lead generation methods, the hidden spend in your organization, why you lose leads or fail to convert them to opportunities. And here to help in that exploration is our special guest today, Tibor Shanto, An author, speaker, and sought-after trainer, Tibor is a 20-year veteran of the information content management and financial sectors. He has developed an insider's perspective on how information can be used to shorten sales cycles, increase close ratios, and create double-digit growth. That sounds great. Welcome, Tibor.
Thank you very much, Fawn. A pleasure to be here.
Great. We're going to just move on to our agenda. We'll go through the agenda for what we're doing. We're going to talk about we'll talk about this in a number of sections, and I want to we'll make this conversational. And if you have questions as you go through this, please put them into the question box on that you've got on your screen there, and we'll watch them as they go through, and we'll answer questions at the end in there. But consider this to be as interactive, and we hope you'll be as interactive as you can be out there. So we're talking about the agenda. We're going to cover an introduction, and we'll do some of the things that Fawn alluded to. The crisis in lead generation we'll talk about, why it's not working, why it appears not to work, or why you're not getting the results you want to get, why your leads don't convert and others do, and we'll talk about the true importance of content and nurturing and how those things work. And then we're going to go over a concept that Fawn and I have developed called lead completion as a service. Fawn and I, and Tibor, sorry, have come up. Lead completion as a service. So, didn't mean to. You'll get your royalty at the end of this if we don't give you credit.
As long as the check is right.
Yeah, as long as the check's there. Yeah, and then we'll have time for questions. But again, we'll welcome questions throughout this. But we're going to start out with a poll. So let's move to our first poll in here. And if you can answer this, that'd be really great. Just to help us keep us in line with what you're thinking. So how satisfied are you with your current lead generation processes? And we've given you 5 options actually. Are you extremely satisfied? Are you moderately happy? Are you dissatisfied? Are you very unhappy? Are you other? Now this is an anonymous poll, so don't worry about it. You can speak truthfully here. But where are you? Are you extremely satisfied, moderately happy, dissatisfied, very unhappy, or other? And we'll give you a couple seconds to get in there. Okay, we're starting to see some of the answers in there, and we'll see them. And I'm just pointing out to my panelists where they can see the answers growing on this. So, yeah, and that's an interesting stat. So we'll close off the poll in there, and we'll push that out to the audience in there so you can see it. But for the most part, people are moderately happy. Okay, that's good. And then about a third of them are dissatisfied or very unhappy or other. And please if you've got other, please put it in the comment as the question box as a comment, because I want to know what you got there. So Tibor, Fawn, what do you think? How does that strike you in terms of what's happening? Most moderately happy, dissatisfied, very unhappy. Tibor, you go into companies all the time. What do you think?
I think it sort of describes what I first see is they think that they're moderately happy. Unfortunately, as Fawn said, the lifeline of the revenue is leads, so it's not something that you want to put into the moderately happy category. I think if we ask the question whether they want it to be, they would like it to be a bit more than moderate. And what would be interesting to me, which clearly is not the forum today, is how do they measure what's moderate and dissatisfied and so on?
Yeah. So how do they measure that? I got to tell you, if you're only moderately happy with what's going on, I don't want to beat your quarterly sales review.
I think it's trying to be polite with your marketing people rather than telling them that they're not doing their job.
Yeah.
You sort of try and say, we're moderately happy, make me happier.
Which is another piece of this. That's marketing.
Yeah,
who are they? Marketing or sales?
Yeah, but I was just going to add to the moderately happy. I question what the leads mean when they're saying moderately happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are they
Yeah.
moderately happy because it's just filling the funnel at the top, but it's not really converting, etc. So
For
I
some
think you
people,
have to go deeper.
For some people, at the Fawn's point, for some people, just getting leads is nirvana itself, never mind the quality,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
just
absolutely.
getting them is a start.
Okay, so but the premise that we started out with here is for this whole thing was that most companies believe that why are leads important? Most companies believe that, do you want to go to the next slide on this? If only they could get in front of the right people at the right time. And we've talked to entrepreneurs, from entrepreneurs to big business, and that is, people believe they've got a great product or service. I hope that the people in the audience do. And I think that many of them believe if I could just get in front of the right person, make my case, I'd win. What do you think?
On a regular basis, salespeople tell me, get me in front of the right guy and I'll close them. And they're quite disappointed when I tell them that the guys who make the big money are the ones who can get in front of the right guy, because closing them is probably the easier part of the two. So getting in front of the right guy is a challenge. Almost anybody can close somebody that's willing to buy, and by that point, that person has demonstrated that they're willing to buy. It's getting ahead of that and getting in front of the right people. And I would argue, as we'll get into later, it's getting in front of people who should be buying at the right time. So not when they're aware that it's the right time only.
And I think the right time is the right words, because really you're talking about where they're at in their journey, their
Right.
buyer's journey.
In their whole
Yeah.
decision
But though
cycle.
it seems like a simple thing, that it's hard. I mean, and it's much harder than you think. And I think I'm old enough to remember when you could phone somebody and you could actually answer the phone, and you could talk to people, and you got your account list, and you could actually get to know it. So you could phone people, say, you're on my account, can I come and see you? And people say, I'm far too busy, and say, well, everybody has to take lunch, so you could still go to lunch, and that. You can kiss those days goodbye. I mean, right now, how do you reach people? Lead generation, content-driven lead generation. There's lots of claims of ways that which you can do that. And in the electronic age, email, blogs, websites, events, webinars. People are trying all kinds of things to get in front of the right people. Social media being a big one now, right? And who are they trying to get in front of? That's, I think, a big thing. Marketing. How many people are they getting? We'll talk about that as we go through that. And there's a lot of players involved.
Right.
I don't know who all the audience are, but some could be in marketing. They could be in the social media end of this. There are lead generation companies that will come out and help you try and find leads. There are event promoters that will try and do these things for you. There's publications. So if you're trying to work all of this, it's complex.
There are stats that show there's upwards of 6.8 people involved in any complex decision involving software, hardware, or what have you. And if you miss targeting or communicating with some of those people early, you could extend the length of the deal, or you could, in fact, defeat the deal. So not only is it how many people are you communicating with, but how many people are you not communicating with that are crucial to the deal.
And in my point, how many moving parts have you got chasing those?
Absolutely.
There's just a lot of Fawn, you've done this for a while.
I think that, we're talking about omni-channel presence
Yeah.
with all these pieces that everyone needs to use, for sure.
Yeah, coordinating all of those.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think the mistake some people make is they put their bet on one, probably their favorite as opposed to the right one. And as Vaughn says, they're not going omni-channel, they're betting on one channel.
Well, and if you're betting on the channels, you can easily lose sight of the process, right? And that's probably
Yeah.
what leads us into this slide.
Yeah, so really, there are many different channels to give you reach, as you were saying. But I think the big thing is, how do you get engagement and consent? And how do you cut through the noise? That's the biggest problem. We're all out there, and we're all making a lot of noise. How do you stand out? And when you do, and you finally get through, how many of these do you convert? And that's basically what I was alluding to in the earlier question. So just so we're clear, we're not talking about a sale. We're talking about getting in contact with the purchaser or influencer and getting them to agree to a conversation, or better still, a meeting.
Yeah. That's the holy grail of this. So we got another poll for everybody as we go into this. So and we're going to talk a little bit about conversion. And conversion, as Fawn said, means getting a meeting in there. But if you've got yourself into a position where you've got 100 people in a list. Let's just say you've got 100. So you got 100 people on a list. How many of those would you expect to turn into meetings? So is it 50% of them? Would you get 50 out of, if you had a list of 100? How many would you get? 50? 25? 10? Or more than that? Would you get close to 5, or would you get less than 5%? So just give us your best answer. We're seeing some of the come in. Now, thank you so much. This is great, by the way. It helps us orient to where you are and be able to talk about it. So once again, we'll close the poll in a second. We'll send it out to the attendees. 36% think 25. Nobody thought 50%. 25% of them said 10% or more. 17%, 5%, 17% said less than 5%. So almost a third in less than 5%, quarter of them at 10%, 42%, 25% or more. I think we're going to find that's a little bit more optimistic than you might think.
Well, I think part of it comes down to what Fawn said earlier. A lot of it is definition. Some people will define a lead as, I've seen companies where I've gone into and they've defined the lead because they found somebody's name and phone number in a directory. So that was now a lead. And I know some CRMs will count that at 10% probability. So it'd be interesting to find out, because again, according to industry stats, as you could see, There's various conversion rates, and these are, as Fawn said earlier, these are scheduled, willing participants in a sales call. So it's not somebody that's taking your newsletter or what have you. So these are people who've committed to at least one business meeting with you.
So are people who predicted on the lower end at around 5 to 7%, pretty much?
Yeah, I think they're probably more accurate, and they're probably a bit more honest about what a lead is versus what a name on a record list is.
Yeah, and I want to stress this. Fawn, you were saying is this is a meeting.
Yeah.
It depends what your close ratio. How many meetings do you have to actually get a sale?
I will argue most salespeople don't know that, because when I ask them their numbers, they probably know their favorite ball players' statistics better than they do their own. And I would argue organizations are getting better now, and I see it cascading down. But it would be interesting to see what the definition is, because I could speak to what's on the screen, and that is converted leads, people who took appointments and entered a sales cycle.
So where we got into this and where we started this was the position that people come up to us and say, sometimes they'll say, oh, we give us all these leads, none of them are any good. You feel like you're on the set of Glengarry and Glen Ross something. We got all the leads, none of them are good. As a matter of fact, if sales are good, what is if sales are good, then it's great salesmanship. If sales are bad, then we get bad leads.
It's always the cards, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. But that piece of it, so we get in there is, and we'll see different versions on this, but people ask that question, why don't these leads work? And I think that's really where we get to with this. If you think only 5% of your leads work, you're saying, why don't the other 95 work? Yeah.
And really, that's why we call it the B2B marketing crises.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why aren't leads converting, and why aren't we getting good leads?
Yeah, and so here's the breaking news in here, and the breaking news is it's not the leads, and I think we know. How do we know? Well, IT World Canada, ITWC, is a lead generation company as well as a publisher, and we see this all the time. We find clients who are thrilled with the same, and we're fishing from the same pool of humanity. Some clients get a list of these people in positions, then they're thrilled, and other people get that can't make it work. So we have clients who succeed royally. We have clients who appear to fail. So why is that? And that's really part of the question we want to get into as we talk about that.
I look at the situation a bit differently based on the work that I've done with some companies. And here's an example. The way I like to look at it is that companies can do everything in their power to get their people more at bats. So as you can see in this example.
Yeah, so let's take a second to orient people to this one. So what's the chart here?
So the chart here is, again, exactly as I was saying. So the company in question, Arctic Wolf, prior to implementing some automation that I'll get to in a second, which was inside sales and accelerator, they were doing about 50 dials per day, and that converted to about 5 opportunities in the pipeline on a daily basis.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
okay.
not bad. When they introduced some automation, they tripled the number of dials that they were making, so outbound attempts, but they doubled the number of conversions that they were having, conversations that they were having. After that, we introduced my methodology, the one that I generally lead with, and what we were able to do is increase the number of conversions. So again, back to Fawn's point, it's one thing to have leads, it's another thing to convert them. So we were able to increase the number of conversions from 21 to 27, giving them a 28.5% lift. And so combined, they were able to take technology or the leads that they already had, put a methodology for conversion in place, and they were able to get a 200% lift as a result.
200% lift.
Right.
Wow. And so the same leads, they're the same people.
Same leads, same people. By introducing technology to be able to process through those leads quicker, they were able to process faster. But when they were engaging with customers, when they were getting a live body on the phone, they were able to increase the conversions by 28.5%. So much like the scenario we're talking here, you can give people the same leads, and as you said, the people on the right side of the street will get one result, and people on the left side will get another result on the same leads. So it's not the leads, it's the way that people are handling those leads that make a difference to the outcome.
Okay.
And that's really the central dilemma. It's how they approach it.
Yeah.
So in this diagram that's coming up next, what we're seeing here is that 10% of people are actively looking. They're actively looking. 20% are passively looking. But it's that 70% of people would say that they're happy with the status quo. They're just investigating, they're just learning at the moment, they're really not ready to be sold. So 20% of them that are passively looking really means that there's some unhappiness there, but they are at best considering what they might do moving forward. And 10% of them that are actively looking, well, we'll talk about those in a moment, but for the other 90%, what do you think happens when you phone them and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from this company, and we saw that you downloaded this asset. Can I meet you, find out more about your problems?" And the answer is, all too many times, the same as you say to the salesperson in the store who pounces on you too early, "I'm just looking."
Yeah.
You know, I wish they were just asking if they can meet. Generally, they're saying, "Are you ready to buy?" And I think that that's one of the problems, is that most of the lead gen programs internally are geared to that 10%. So
Yeah.
the messaging, the salespeople, everybody's wound up to talk to the people who live in the 10% neighborhood. Yet when they talk to people who are maybe 9 months out, which to me as a salesperson would be great because I have a nice long runway to become their emotional favorite and really be there when they switch from looking to actually buying. And I think that's where most of the lead gen programs, and that's where the mindset of the salespeople kill the leads, and that's where I think the stats that you saw on the previous slide, that was some of the differences we were
But
able
this
to implement.
this is human nature. This part hasn't changed in
Right.
here. I remember when I was a young doing sales. Somebody said, "You want to get married, and we haven't even had a date yet."
Right.
You know.
And so the other problem that people run into, and it's significant on the slide that's on the screen, is that, again, as Fawn said, you have 90% who are not ready to buy. They don't have checkbooks in hand, but that doesn't mean that they're not ready to be influenced, so they're not thinking about things. And as you can see from the slide up on the screen, 75% of people who switch from vendor A to vendor B were completely satisfied or satisfied at the time that they switched. And most salespeople, when they hear a satisfied customer, they get a great lead from you, and they call up and the customer implies that they're satisfied with things as the way they are. They see that as a dead opportunity. They come back and they say it's a bad lead, as opposed to acting on the fact that 75% of the people that they blow off, they can actually convert.
Yeah. So that although those people don't appear to be interested, they are a gold mine.
They're not ready to buy. The question is, are you ready to buy? And it's the wrong question.
Yeah. Okay. And so I think we talked about this before. This journey that people go through is long and gets longer and longer. And we got this, we took this, I'll give Microsoft full credit for this because we took this from a Microsoft study in there. And said it showed just exactly what happens when that you get that give up at the first lead piece. So and you go for 12 steps, and there may even be more in there. We've got our own 12-step program here, but from the contact to when the person becomes a customer. Mm-hmm. So if you think there are at least 12 steps on this long road, here's what happens. On step one, when most people make that call and they hit the 70 or even the 20% that we talked about who are not going to be moved, and they say, "Well, I'm just looking, I'm not interested," they move on. And 50% of salespeople give up after the first contact. After the second contact, 65% have given up, and by the third, 79%. By four, almost 90% of salespeople have given up on the fourth contact in there. Now, you go through 5, 6, 7. By the time you start to get to the seventh contact, you're starting to get some low-hanging fruit. Maybe there's a smaller deal you can do. Maybe there's something you could do to get to know them. By 8, 9, and really it's by step 9 that you really start to get to the point where if you're in front of them and they've got a need, you may close them. And that might be a 9, 10, 11, 12, or as we might discover, even more than that. So it's a long road, and so this whole idea of when you're calling into that group of 90% who are either not really looking yet or they're moderately dissatisfied, and you don't start that journey. That's the thing, and that's the thing I spot more than anything is that people want some immediate response or they just move on.
Right. And I would say that even worse than this is, again, this is looking at it from the salesperson's point of view, when do they give up? But let's look at it from the customer's point of view, because they're the ones with the checks. And as you see from the chart, they're taking longer to make decisions. So again, about 6% see a significant increase in the length of their buying cycle, which is generally longer to begin with than the expectation of the salespeople. So there's already this disparity in
So
patience.
that's on
as
the
it
left.
were.
6%
Right.
say that they're.
Yeah, 48% say somewhat increased in sales cycles. So despite all this myth out there that things are getting easier and faster, buyers are taking longer to make decisions. And about 37% have stayed the same, and only a small 9% have decreased to some amount. So when you juxtapose this chart with the one you had up before, I think you'll see that that disconnect is much wider and is expanding as opposed to getting better.
And I think if you talk to many good salespeople, they'll tell you it's getting longer. I think the expectation though somehow people are going to, SaaS is out there. I can just buy right away and I'll solve
Well,
it.
again, so that ready 10% that Fawn was referring to, they might be ready to buy right away, right? So when they run into somebody that's maybe in passive or in status quo, they may still be ready to buy, but it's just not right away, and the salespeople move on. And we can get into a whole bunch of things about how much they're getting beat up over quotas and all that. But to the point you made earlier, they're giving up way too early, and as a result, it's not the lead that's bad; it's the way it's being sold.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to your point, you're saying that it's taking a lot longer to do a sale. One of the reasons for that is because there is another level of complexity. As we all know, in B2B sales, it's not just one person that you have to win over. There's a lot of people involved in B2B sales at all levels that they can either influence, block, recommend, or approve. That number has truly grown significantly in the past 10 years. This is a stat from IDG worldwide. So from 5 to 12 people, depending on the size of your company, to 6 to 17 now. That's a lot of people. It's a third more. So who has the resources to do this? Who has the staff? Who has the time?
Who has the understanding?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when we introduced account-based selling 100 years ago, and people had to talk to 4 people in the organization before it would count, we all whined, right? And now we're talking about huge numbers in there, and that's why I think sales is important. But the problem is it can't scale. And for many companies, I think maybe one of the reasons they give up or they give up early, is they just can't scale this. The amount of time that you have, and I'm not going to go in defense of salespeople, but I think I gave up one job with a former consulting firm, and I headed up sales was in my area, and I ran a global practice. I phoned all my salespeople after I started my own company and did my own sales. I phoned them all to apologize. It's hard work.
It's a blue-collar job.
Yeah, and it's difficult to find good people who are willing to do this. If you get on the phone and cold calling, I don't know, like you pick up the phone, you're going to talk to somebody, and you're getting told no 100 times. It's there, but it's also takes a long time to do. I ran across this stat, and I think I may have gotten it from you, Tibor, but it was 2/3 of a salesperson's time is spent prospecting, and I believe that from watching people.
Yeah, no, I could see the stat.
Yeah.
I can't take claim for it, but I could see
Yeah,
it.
but the 2/3, but an immense amount of time. We watch our salespeople here. We've got our own sales team, and they spend a lot of time just trying to get in front of new people.
But something to think about. We don't need to go deep on it, but one of the reasons is again the quality of leads. In the old days you had good leads, so it didn't take as long, or it wasn't as difficult. I would argue now with lists becoming equivalent to leads, and we know what the differences are, that's why the effort has gone up.
Yeah.
So while it didn't take us 2/3 because we had quality leads, as it were, we generated our own, so they had to be quality.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
now they're getting lists that are not leads, they're just lists, and that's why they're seeing
Yeah.
the results they're getting.
Yeah, and personal contact, time spent going across town to get a meeting. I don't know if you've ever you have to do a sales call in downtown Toronto, you've killed your whole day in there. That and Fawn's idea, the multiple decision makers. Like
Yeah.
this is tough, and it's
Yeah.
tough work. So how do you do all that? And I think one of the answers is content, and we've heard a lot about that. How can you use content to cover that number of people and all of that?
And content really solves a mechanical problem. I mean, you can cover a lot of ground, to your point, Jim, reach a lot of people. If you are working it well, you can even tell where they are in the buyer's journey, which we had mentioned earlier, from the type of content and the way that they're consuming it. And that's very important.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure everybody's read, Dan Pink's, information parity argument and so on. But the reality is the pendulum is swung the other way. So now buyers are being overwhelmed with so much information, some of it of questionable quality. And as you can see, the same folks who brought you to Challenger Sale and Challenger Customer have identified that, in fact, unlike what salespeople are being told by their companies, buyers are actually confused and are paralyzed and are looking for insights. So they're looking for somebody to make sense of all this information that's being sent at them. And again, the combination of the right information and the right message from the salespeople changes the quality of a lead.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, then there is the hidden funnel. And as we've all read in many marketing briefs, 60% of the buyer's journey is accomplished before they talk to a salesperson, because we all know what we do when we want to buy something. We get on the internet, we do our research. So it's a de facto piece there that you need to understand before you're even talking to that person on the phone. So in some cases, content is one of the few ways that you can reach people in the early stages. Stats tell us that de facto piece. So remember way back when we said that 10% of leads were ready to buy, the so-called BANT leads, where you know they have a budget, authority, need, and a timeline. How well do you think you fare if you enter the sale late in the game and they have no knowledge of you? In a lot of cases, you need to be leveraging content, maybe not as your only tool, but certainly as an important tool.
And there's, if I could just add, the flip part of that is that, again, because everybody's focused on that 10%, the messaging and the type of content that they're sending to the 90% is not engaging them, and as Fawn said, is not encouraging them to get in the process early. So you're almost forcing, by sending them back content, you're forcing yourself to be engaged late when they're just looking at price and features.
Well, yeah, so bad, it goes back to good content, bad content.
If you can engage with them while they're passive or status quo, then you can influence their thinking. If you wait till they're into this past 60%, then they're influencing your pricing.
Yeah, and I think the issue is true. Content, I've heard content is king. Content,
Content is queen.
Content
Come
is
on.
queen. Yes, content is queen.
Is
But the fact is, the content has to be good content.
Yeah.
You said that, Timur. It has to be engaging. You talked about that, Fawn. And these are difficult to do. I mean, content was the new thing that we're going to do, but content and social campaigns are long-term investments. They can help you cover wide, but you've got to spend a lot of time and a lot of energy in them. They're easy to start, and gosh, they're easy to start. Pumping out one piece of content is really easy. Keeping it up. Anybody started a blog program, and everybody's done this. We run them for people precisely because they start up, they get one, then they get a second, and then they get busy.
They get three.
Yeah.
How they started the business, how they got their first sale, and how they met their wife, and that's it.
And none of them any good for selling, but creating. But the fact is, you don't cut your own hair, you don't fill your own teeth, and if you're not writing constantly, and if your business isn't engaging in people in content, then it's not your core competency, and that's why people struggle as well. Because a good writer will write every day; they'll write up to deadline in there. It's also more difficult to reach audiences, and I think the people who buy this, this is a big panacea. With Castle, with all of those things, how do you get out? How do you engage people? How do you get through them? And the only way, the remedy we've seen is that you got to be consistent. There's a lot of content out there. You got to keep good content and apply it consistently.
And as you know better than anybody, a lot of people, again, confuse content with just a re-glorified brochure, right? So sending out information about your company is not content.
Yes, and I'll have one word for that: bang, bang, bang on the table. We do a lot of editing of content here, and we're constantly saying, is this of value? Why must I read this?
We have to deliver insight, and that's what I think people miss, is that if your lead gen content has insight, people will be attracted to it, and the people producing it.
Yeah, and so people think people struggling with content, well, we'll give them video. We'll give them podcasts and things like that. And it's the same thing. You have to be very good at it. Engaging video is hard to do, takes skill.
I think Marshall McLuhan would take back his statement. The medium is no longer the message.
Yeah, and again, it's the same. I would say, because we're doing electronic marketing does not mean the rules of marketing have been suspended. It's just a different way of doing it. You still have to have multiple touch points. You still have to span the buyer's journey. You still have to continually nurture them in there. And I put this together. I'll just walk through this diagram. Nurturing is a continuing proposal in there. You know, it's like you start, you get your initial engagement. If you actually get a hold of somebody, good or bad or whatever, and you start to nurture them, you have to measure the signals you get. Are they, you know, and I think your chart, Tibor, are they in the 70%, are they in the 20%, are they in the 10%? You know, and you can, as Fawn was saying, you can tell where they are by what content they're consuming. And I think hopefully by talking to them, the old-fashioned thing of human contact, but are they investigating? Are they still in that 70%? In which case, you might go to them and say, you know, can we get an initial meeting? Can we get together? They say no. And you say, well, that's fine, but we'll follow up with you later, and you continue to nurture them. That's the benefit of content. Even if they're in the consideration that they're starting to look, you know, you could say, well, can we come up for a presentation, a different type of meeting, presentation. But again, if they say no, well, you can continue to nurture them.
And as you said, if you know they're in the 70% versus the 20 or what have you, this again could come out looking a bit differently because the kind of communication you would spend to somebody in status quo is going to be different, and the touch points are going to be different. And the whole idea is to do nurture, not just hey, you want to buy, and move on, but to nurture.
Yeah, and so you have to follow that through, but it's a continuing proposal. Remember that
lifelong commitment.
Our 12-step program there. You know, you got to get through it. Yeah.
It's really about building relationships too. I mean, we have a gentleman on our staff, and for years what he does is when he finds an interesting article that he knows one of his customers or people he's talked to over the years would be interested, he just sends it to them. Sometimes it doesn't have to be your content. It could be content that's available in other places.
Good and
Exactly.
good for them, yeah.
That's
And
right.
as a result, he gets to be viewed as a source of insight.
Yeah.
And valuable. He's not just calling for money.
Yeah, but he does an incredible amount of work finding that content too.
Yes, that's
The
very
money
true.
content.
That's very true.
The content that people are interested in.
Yeah. So, you know, again, in this slide that you're seeing, 50% more sales-ready leads are done when companies excel at lead nurturing content.
This is
It's
an
so
IDG study
important.
again, I think.
Yep. And it's at a 33% lower cost, which when you think about it actually makes sense. So when nurtured leads make 47% of larger purchases than non-nurtured leads, you really have to ask yourself, shouldn't I be thinking about this in order, you know, to get a higher top level of revenue?
Be nice to ask that poll question again. So how do you feel about your lead completion process now? Yeah.
So, as the slide says, if you feel this way, you're not alone. Marketing solutions are resource intensive, as we were talking, time consuming, from strategy to engaging the customer or customer to be. So if you aren't an IBM, and many of us are not, you may look at this and say, that's great, but we can't do this. Well, we don't have the resources. No, we can't do that consistently. We do need a simpler solution. We need something that's turnkey, something we can afford.
So just to summarize this, you know, this is the analogy I use is like if we sold the way if we planted gardens, which is all springtime, we're all out there planting gardens. If we planted our garden the way we sell, here's what we would do. We'd go and drop a seed into the garden. We'd come back tomorrow after having not watered it and asked ourselves why it wasn't growing. And then we'd curse that seed and we'd go plant another one. And we'd go back to the store and buy some more seeds and keep planting them. The reality is you have to treat this as one of those things you can't force. Yes, you have to identify the qualified leads in there. Then you talked about that better lists, better leads. You have to make those initial contacts, yes, and you have to nurture. You have to nurture the relationship with the client using the personal contact, using content, you know, get all the things we talked about, and then introduce your key sales resource at the right time in there.
With the right message, I think the other way to look at what's up on the screen is what are you communicating to different people at different leads. I work with one company and they had what they would tell you was a robust communication and lead nurturing program, but it was a volume game. So if they felt that you weren't ready, they would just send more of the same. And I think the secret is, and the opportunity is to send the right content. So if somebody's a year out from purchase, what was your last purchaser thinking a year ago? And that's the content that should be sent to that person that's a year out. What will they be thinking about when they're 6 months away from their purchase, not from when your quota is due? and what message would you send them? So I think, again, somebody who's a year away from purchasing needs to get different content than somebody who's 3 months away from purchasing.
But this immediacy thing is part of what's killing us.
Yeah.
You know, in it you can't make a person buy, faster than they're going to buy.
No.
And yet, those are your next year's clients.
Yeah, and those 9 months that you have as lead runway, what I call is the time that you can become their emotional favorite. So by
Yeah.
the time they switch gears into that 10%, they're imprinted on you. Whereas, like, if you're joining the game, like Fawn said, late in the game at that 10%, your only entry ticket in is a discount.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there are a number of companies that are realizing that
Yeah.
and are realistic enough to know that it does take time, it does take effort and persistence. So with that in mind, today IT World Canada, we're very happy to launch a new service called Lead Conversion as a Service, because we've gone through the pain, we understand your pain. This isn't a new discovery. It does reflect what we see as best practices from the best in the industry. And how do we know? Well, they're our clients. So it is hard work. It requires relentless execution. And I'd like to tell you a bit about what's involved. We'll work with you to identify your products and services. We'll match those to a CASL-compliant database of target customers. And we'll nurture that pool using topic-driven content that we've developed studying the audience as only a publisher can, direct content, advanced analytics, and our ability to amplify that content to your target audiences. So from our analysis, we'll intervene on your behalf at various points in the process, looking for that opportunity to convert that lead to a meaningful contact. Again, a meaningful contact is getting an appointment. And that's where your excellent sales resources come in, the ones that are no longer spending 2/3 of their time prospecting.
Yeah, so in essence, you're giving time to the salespeople to be able to spend the time to nurture
To sell.
those clients, to sell and to do those things that they need to do, build relationships, yeah. So that's one of the things in there. So that's great in there. That's really our program here in terms of what we've got to present. What I'd like to do is go through some of the questions in there, and please put your questions in the question box, and we'll go through them. And I guess one of the first questions is, Tibor, the whole thing of how do you when you get that, and you go back to your slide in there, I'll just paraphrase the question, is how do you make sure you get the right engagement? How do you engage those people? So you get the 70% to 20%. What do you train people to do to make that right engagement?
Well, without getting too deep, first of all, part of it is the messaging. So, the people at the 70% status quo are looking at the market differently than the 10%. And generally speaking, they're much more forward-looking because they don't perceive a problem or a pain or any hurdles in their immediate future, or at least in their visibility. They continue to focus on their long-term or mid-term objectives. So the messaging has to align with that. Where does that business want to be a year from now based on trends that we're seeing? So what I would communicate is around things that are long-term. As we get into the 20%, which are passively looking, they might need a new piece of equipment a year from now, so in their mind they have about 9 months. So what were people thinking about who are current customers of yours? What were they thinking about 9 months before they made that
Well, that's
purchase
great.
decision?
So that initial call for those people who haven't moved, what was your client thinking about 9 months ago?
Yeah, so you share with them insights that you gleaned from the last deal, and you know that 9 months ago they were thinking about the color red, so you talk about the color red despite the fact that what you sell is blue, because right now they're not ready to talk about blue.
Yeah.
But if you want to stay engaged and nurture, as you say, then you have to get into their lane instead of dragging them into your lane, which is what most salespeople are trying to do. As you said earlier, even though the customer is not ready to buy for 9 months, they're trying to drag them into this quarter because their quota is short.
Yeah, a friend of mine once said, if you want people to get on the bus with you, you can do one of two things. You can bring the bus to where they are and invite them on, or you can go stand to where you want them to be and pretend they're going to get on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think most salespeople are doing the latter.
Yeah,
I think that's a good way to sort of.
Yeah, so Fawn, let's talk about content in there. The question is, how do you what's a good content program, and why is a publisher so good at that and companies aren't?
Well, I think some companies are good at it. It's not just a publisher, but in general, a publisher has more experience and they have more contact with their audience. So because we're constantly, daily putting out content, it's not just news, it could be just, very interesting stories. It could be issues that we're exploring. We're constantly going to events. We understand what the industry as a whole is talking about. We get what are the critical pieces that people are looking for, what people are searching for. And of course, like all the other people on the phone, we're all looking at Google Analytics. We're all looking at what people are downloading and what's most popular. But because we have volume, and instead of looking at 200, we're looking at 1 million.
Yeah.
That gives you an incredible amount of data in order to understand what you should be crafting.
So having the data, having the skills to write, having that. I think
Yeah.
there's one last piece that everybody, not everybody knows. I'm a musician. I went to see an old blues player, and he was a really old guy. Just really, and he said, people ask me how I got to be so good. He said, if you do the same thing every day for 40 years and you don't get good, shame on you. And I think that's part of it is that writing and content creation is the lifeblood of the company.
Yes.
And so, and it may not be your lifeblood in your other company, so you get distracted. You focus on what's important.
I think the other thing you get as a publisher's perspective, you get to see everything that they interact with, not just that one piece, whereas most vendors will send out a very binary piece, and if they don't react to it, they assume there's no interest, where there might be a lot of different interests, it's just that piece didn't hit it.
Yeah, good stuff. Any more questions? We're in questions in there. So we're gonna go off and to a wrap, but I want to go through one last piece of this, and that's what people can do. Fawn, you want to walk us through is what can people do if they want an evaluation of their content done by us, and we'll talk about the current lead completion. Sorry.
Okay, well, first of all, as you can see, we've given you our EVP, Ray Christofferson. That is his email. Would love to hear from you. Please just drop us a note, and we'll get back to you, and we will supply you with the beginnings of our discovery process.
Yeah, and we'll walk through a discovery process
Yeah.
with you. We'll talk about some things like where are you focused, how many, what is your current lead completion look like, where do you want to be? Once we talk about this in digital transformation, we always talk about transformation. One of the real questions to ask in transformation is what do you want to transform into? And it's the same thing with the lead completion process. What do you want to do? Because if as the old thing from Alice in Wonderland is, when you don't know where you're going, any direction will do.
Right. So again, thank you everyone for your attention. Appreciate it. As we said earlier, if you have any topics that you'd like us to explore under the series, please send an email to cmo@itwc.ca, and we'll talk to you next time. And thank you, Tibor, for coming in.
Thank you, it was a pleasure.